The silence before the truth crowd was already standing, not out of obligation, not because someone asked them to, but because something about that night felt different. It wasn't just a birthday tribute. It wasn't just another Hollywood celebration. They were honoring Keanu Reeves. But what none of them knew, not even Sandra Bullock sitting quietly in the front row, was that Keanu was about to say something that would leave the entire room in stunned silence. He wasn't here to talk about awards or films. He had carried something in his heart for decades, and tonight, in front of everyone, that weight was finally going to fall away. But let's go back, before the lights, before the standing ovation. Before the confession. It started a week earlier. Keanu Reeves was sitting on the floor of his living room, the kind of floor that's a little cold and comforting all at once. He had just come back from a small charity event in Brooklyn, one of those events no paparazzi knew about. He had spoken to a child there who had lost both parents. The boy had asked him quietly, "Why do people leave before they say what they really feel?" That question stayed with Keanu. He had thought of his own losses, his daughter, Jennifer, his best friend River Phoenix, and somehow, Sandra. Not that she was gone. She wasn't. They had worked together, smiled on red carpets, made jokes during interviews. But something always stopped them. A pause, a silence, a missed moment. Keanu stood up from the floor that night and walked over to the piano. He let his fingers drift across the keys, not playing any song in particular, just sound, like trying to find a feeling inside himself. He closed his eyes. Then he whispered, "Maybe it's time." Days passed. Organizers called him constantly. The birthday tribute was going to be big. A-listers, executives, global live stream. Everyone wanted him to give a speech that was iconic. Keanu said yes, but only if he could write his own words. They didn't expect what he had in mind. On the morning of the event, Sandra Bullock received her invitation. A handwritten note at the bottom said, "I hope you'll be there." She didn't recognize the handwriting until she looked again. Keanu. Her heart skipped. They hadn't spoken deeply in years. Friendly texts, holiday greetings, the occasional phone call, but nothing personal, not since, well, she remembered it clearly. A moment during the filming of The Lake House when he had looked at her, like he wanted to say something, but didn't. She had done the same. Sandra held the invitation close to her chest and whispered, "This time, don't leave anything unsaid." The tribute was held in an old Hollywood theater, the kind with red velvet curtains and chandeliers that looked like frozen waterfalls. Everyone was there. Robert Downey Jr. hugged him backstage. Winona Ryder kissed his cheek and called him our lighthouse. Even Hugh Jackman flew in from Australia for the event. But Keanu's eyes kept going back to one person. Sandra. She was seated alone, not because no one wanted to sit with her, but because she had asked to be. Her dress was simple, elegant, just like her. Her eyes met his for a moment, and he gave the softest nod. A nod that said, "Tonight." Finally. As the crowd cheered for other speakers, laughed at stories, watched clips of his films, Keanu sat backstage breathing slowly. He held a piece of folded paper in his hand, but he knew he wouldn't read it. When the host called his name, the applause shook the walls. Keanu walked out slowly, not waving, not gesturing, just being present, being real. He stood at the center of the stage, smiling gently. He began, "Thank you," he said, "for this, for being here, for seeing me." The crowd hushed. "I'm grateful," he continued, "not just for the movies or the moments, but for the people who've walked beside me. Some stayed, some left, some passed on, but all of them shaped me." He paused, and then looked directly at Sandra. "But there's one person I've never truly thanked, someone who's been part of my journey in ways even I didn't understand." The room was still. Sandra's single quotes S expression didn't change. "Not yet." Keanu spoke slowly, carefully. "We met on a bus." "Well, not really," he chuckled. "We met on a movie set. But that bus and speed, it changed everything. Not just our careers, not just Hollywood. It changed me." Sandra blinked. "I didn't know it then," he said. "I didn't know how rare it is to meet someone who makes you feel calm, even when there's chaos all around. I didn't know how important that would become in my life." The audience was holding their breath. Keanu looked down for a moment, then back up. His voice softened. I was always someone who kept things inside. Fear, pain, even love, I thought. Silence was strength. But I've learned that strength is saying what you feel while you still can. And then he did it. He turned fully toward Sandra and said, Sandra, I've loved you in quiet ways for many years, and even though we took different paths, part of my heart stayed with you. You could hear gasps in the audience, not from shock, but from something deeper, shared vulnerability. Keanu stepped down from the podium, the lights gently following him as he walked toward Sandra. People thought it was part of the tribute, a staged moment, a scripted drama. But Sandra's eyes said otherwise. They glistened not with performance, but with truth. He knelt in front of her, not proposing, not performing. Just present. Thank you, he said, for being the light during my darkest days, even when you didn't know it. Sandra reached out, her hand trembling, and touched his cheek. You didn't have to say it, she whispered, but I'm glad you did. And then, for the first time in their long journey, they embraced in a way that wasn't just for the cameras. It was real. And the entire room stood again, not for a movie star, not for a speech, but for love that finally found the courage to speak. Asterisk when the cameras stopped rolling, when the cameras faded, and the applause began to settle. The crowd still stood frozen in the echo of something more powerful than fame. It was not about celebrity anymore, not about movies, not even about the birthday tribute. People didn't know what to do after hearing those words. Sandra, I've loved you in quiet ways for many years. Some blinked in disbelief. Others smiled through tears. One young woman near the back whispered to her friend, did that really just happen? Yes, it did. And it wasn't over. Backstage, Keanu sat on a worn-out leather sofa in the green room, elbows on knees, staring at the floor like it held the rest of his heart. There were no handlers, no agents, no assistants for once. He had asked everyone to leave him alone. Then he heard a soft knock. He didn't look up right away, but he didn't need to. The door opened slowly, and Sandra stepped in. She didn't say anything. She just closed the door behind her, walked over, and sat beside him. There was silence, not awkward, not heavy, just honest. Finally, Sandra spoke first. You sure picked a dramatic way to say it, she said. With the smallest smile. Keanu let out a short laugh, shaking his head. I didn't plan to say it like that. I couldn't hold it anymore. Sandra nodded. Double quotes. I know. For a long moment, they said nothing more. The silence between them wasn't the kind that needed to be filled. It was the kind that had waited patiently for years to be shared. Then Sandra said something Keanu wasn't ready for. I felt it too, you know. Back then, I thought you didn't. He turned toward her, eyes filled with so much softness it looked like they might break. I did, he whispered. But I was scared. I didn't want to ruin what we had. And now, she asked. Now? Keanu looked down. Now I wish I had said it sooner. But maybe this was the right time. She gently reached for his hand. Maybe, she said, there's still time. The rest of the night blurred into quiet conversations, soft laughter, and curious stares. Rumors spread fast through Hollywood. Some people assumed it was a publicity stunt. Others thought it was a long-hidden truth finally revealed. But those who really knew Keanu, they understood. He never faked emotions. If he said it, he meant it. The next morning, the world had exploded. Headlines everywhere read, Keanu confesses love for Sandra on birthday stage. Crowd erupts. Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock. Decades later, hearts collide. Keanu's words stop time. I've loved you in quiet ways for many years. The internet did what it always does. Videos went viral. Fans cried. Some joked. Some speculated. But none of that mattered to Keanu, because he woke up that morning with one message on his phone. From Sandra. Walk with me. Keanu showed up at Griffith Park, wearing jeans and an old hoodie, like he always did when he wanted to disappear into the world. But when he saw Sandra standing by the trailhead, waiting with 2 coffees in hand, he felt more seen than ever before. They started walking. At first, it was small talk. Her dog, his motorcycle, the sky. Then she stopped and turned to him. So, what now? She asked. Keanu looked at her, really looked. Honestly, I don't know. I don't expect anything. I just wanted you to know, finally. But what if I want more than just knowing? She said softly. His heart skipped. Are you saying? I'm saying maybe we let the cameras roll this time. She smiled. Just not the Hollywood ones. They spent the whole day together. No bodyguards, no press. Just two people who had missed their moment long ago and were now trying to catch up on time. They walked until the sun began to set behind the hills. And as the golden light fell across the trail, Keanu did something he hadn't done in a long time. He reached out for her hand and didn't let go. Later that night, Keanu sat by himself again, but this time in his quiet home library, holding a small old photo. It was of him and Sandra on the set of Speed, both laughing at something off camera. His eyes had been looking at her even then. How many years had passed since that picture? He whispered to the photo, maybe we were never late. Maybe we were. Just on our own time. Meanwhile, Sandra opened her own drawer back home. Inside it was a letter. Never sent. Never spoken. She unfolded it slowly and read the first line to herself. Dear Keanu, I'm afraid you don't feel what I do, but in case you ever do, I want you to know. She stopped reading and smiled. Maybe I'll finish this one day, she whispered. Or maybe we're finally writing the new one together. The world still buzzed with noise. Late night shows joked about it. Fans debated it. Tabloids tried to chase it. But the two people at the center of it all, they weren't performing anymore. They were simply living each moment real, each word true. Asterisk the chapter they never wrote. Until no 3 weeks had passed since Keanu's heartfelt confession on stage. The world hadn't stopped talking. Yet somehow, he and Sandra had found a way to move through the noise. They didn't hide, but they didn't explain either. No interviews, no statements, no follow-ups. It wasn't silence. It was peace. On a quiet Tuesday afternoon, Keanu sat across from Sandra at a small cafe in the valley. It was tucked behind a row of bookstores and antique shops, the kind of place tourists didn't usually find. A soft breeze stirred the pages of the notebook lying on their table. You still write in those? Sandra asked, pointing to the leather-bound journal. Keanu nodded. Always have. Thoughts, lines, stuff I want to remember. She smiled. You ever write about me? He looked up and held her gaze. I did. A lot. She blinked. Why didn't you ever show me? Because back then, he said gently, it was easier to write you than to face you. She sat back, stunned by the honesty. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, and now, Keanu said, flipping the journal open, I want to share every word. They spent that afternoon reading aloud pieces of their past. He read a short poem he had written during the filming of The Lake House. It wasn't polished or poetic, it was raw. You smiled like you forgot the world was watching. I didn't say it then, but in that moment, I forgot everything too. Sandra's eyes misted over. You remember that day? She asked. Yeah, he said. We were waiting for the lighting crew. You kept twirling in the grass. I wanted to stop time. I was twirling, she laughed, because I was trying not to cry. Keanu tilted his head. Why? She hesitated. Then said, because you were standing so close, and yet I felt so far. He reached across the table and gently took her hand. Never again, he said. That evening, they walked through the park without their usual distance. No more walking side by side pretending they were just friends. Their hands stayed intertwined. Their smiles no longer held secrets, but something unexpected happened. As they passed by a small family celebrating a birthday, a little girl pointed and yelled, Look, it's the guy from The Matrix. The parents turned, and soon others noticed. Phones came out, flashes clicked. Someone shouted, Are you two dating? Keanu stepped forward, shielding Sandra with his body. Please give us a moment, he said, calm but firm. But the cameras kept flashing. And then something unexpected happened. Sandra stepped forward. Yes, she said loudly. We're here together, and no, we're not acting. So please let us have this moment. The crowd quieted. People didn't expect that. They didn't expect Sandra Bullock to speak with such vulnerability. And they definitely didn't expect Keanu to wrap his arm gently round her shoulders and nod in agreement. Thank you, he added, and began leading her away. Later that night, Headlines exploded again. Sandra speaks out. We're not acting. Keanu and Sandra seen hand in hand. This is real. When Keanu said he loved her, he meant it. But for Keanu and Sandra, none of those mattered. They were already in a world of their own. A few nights later, Keanu invited Sandra to a private screening room he had built at home. Just a small setup projector, two recliners, and a cabinet filled with old DVDs and film reels. I want to show you something, he said. She raised an eyebrow. Let me guess, speed. He shook his head. No, something I shot myself. He pressed play. What followed was a series of clips he had filmed over the years. Short moments, some behind the scenes, others just quiet glimpses of everyday life. But in nearly every clip, she was there, laughing behind a camera, standing in the rain between takes, walking through a garden, waving from a taxi. Keanu, she whispered, her voice cracking. Why did you keep all this? He looked at her with a tenderness few ever saw. Because when the world felt chaotic, he said, you reminded me of stillness. Tears rolled down her cheek. I never knew you saw me like that. I didn't know how to tell you. He replied, until now. In the days that followed, they made no grand declarations, no joint interviews, no red carpets. But the people who knew them really knew them saw something had changed. Winona Ryder called Sandra and said, I've never seen him stand that tall before. Even Lawrence Fishburne messaged Keanu one line, took you long enough. But not everyone approved. A Hollywood executive, someone who had worked with both stars, called Keanu and warned him. This could change things, the voice said. You two are icons. People will talk. Your next projects could get overshadowed. You sure about this? Keanu paused, then simply replied, I'd rather be real than legendary, and hung up. One afternoon, they sat on Keanu's porch, watching. The rain rolled down the glass. We can still walk away from this, Sandra said quietly. If it ever gets too much. Keanu turned to her. I won't walk away, he said. Not again. She smiled and leaned into him. Then let's stop looking back, she said, and just be here. He finished, and they sat there, side by side, as the rain wrote poems on the windows, and their hearts wrote a new story, one not made for screens, but for something much more real. The storm they didn't see coming. Days that followed were quieter. But sometimes, quiet isn't peace. Sometimes, quiet is the sound right before the storm. And this one came from someone they never expected. Keanu Reeves was sitting in his kitchen, brewing coffee the way he always did. No fancy machines, just a kettle and patience. The window was slightly open, letting in the soft rustle of leaves and the faraway hum of morning traffic. His phone buzzed. A message from an old friend in the industry. Hey, you might want to see this. Attached was a link. He tapped it. The headline hit like a punch to the chest. Exclusive, Sandra Bullock's former partner claims Keanu ruined everything. Below it, a video clip began to autoplay. It was a man in his early 50s sitting in a studio with cold lighting, clearly angry. She and I were trying again, the man said bitterly. We were finally talking, reconnecting, and then out of nowhere, Keanu decides to make a show of his feelings. It wasn't romance, it was selfishness. Keanu stared at the screen, his jaw tight. He knew the man, someone from Sandra's past, a brief relationship that hadn't lasted, but had always lingered in the background. He didn't expect this. And now, the media had a new storm to feed on. Sandra called later that morning, her voice calm but heavy. You saw it? She asked. Double quotes. Yeah. Keanu said softly, I did. She paused. I didn't know he'd do that. I know. He's not part of my life anymore. Keanu hasn't been for years. But I think this hurt him. It's not your fault, Keanu said firmly. None of it is. Sandra hesitated. Do you regret what you said on stage? His voice didn't waver. Not even for a second. But Hollywood is never slow when blood is in the water. Within hours, the clip had been dissected by talk shows, commentaries, and bloggers. Some defended Keanu's public confession. Others painted it as a reckless romantic stunt that had broken up a private reconciliation. The narrative was being twisted again and again. Keanu wasn't angry, but he felt something deeper than anger. He felt sadness. Not because of the headlines, but because he saw how it hurt Sandra. She began avoiding events. Paparazzi hounded her house. Tabloids showed her looking stressed, tired, on the edge. People forgot she was human. Keanu went to her place one evening with a small brown paper bag. Inside it were candles, her favorite snacks, a scarf she had once left at his home, and a note. He didn't ring the doorbell. He just left the bag at her door, knocked gently, and walked back to his bike. As he pulled out of her driveway, the door opened slowly. She stood there in silence, holding the bag, and inside the note, only one sentence was written. We don't need to explain love to anyone but ourselves. The next day, Sandra came to his home. No sunglasses, no hat, no attempt to hide. Keanu opened the door, surprised. Coffee? She asked. He laughed. Always. They sat on the porch, and she said something he hadn't expected. I'm done letting others shape our story. He looked at her. We tell it, she said. No more running, even if they twist it again. She nodded. Even then, he took a deep breath. What were you thinking? She pulled out her phone and tapped her notes app. We write it ourselves, she said. One post, one truth, together. An hour later, they posted it on both their social media pages. A photo of the two of them walking together in the woods. No filters, no makeup. Just two people holding hands. The caption was short. We've spent our lives pretending on screen. This is not one of those times. We are not perfect. We are not always graceful. But we are real, and we are okay with that. The post broke the internet. Millions of likes, thousands of comments. But more than anything, silence from the tabloids. For once, the truth was louder. That night, they lit the candles from the brown bag and sat on the living room floor. No plans, no rush. You okay? Keanu asked. Sandra nodded. Yeah, I think I am. He leaned back on his elbows. I wish we had done this earlier. Me too, she said. But maybe we had to go through all the noise first, to find the silence, to find each other in it. Just when they thought the storm had passed, life reminded them how unpredictable it could be. A week later, Sandra received a letter. Not an email, not a message, an actual letter in the mail. She read it once, then again. Her hands trembled. She called Keanu. Can you come over? She asked. Now. He arrived in 20 minutes. She handed him the letter. He read the words slowly. If you think this is over, think again. You ruined my life, and I'm not done. It was unsigned, untraceable. But they both knew who it was from. Keanu looked at her. Do you feel safe? She nodded, but her eyes said otherwise. Keanu stood. I'm staying here tonight. You don't have to, I know, but I want to. That night, they didn't talk much, just shared space. Sometimes love isn't about saying the right things. Sometimes it's about sitting quietly when someone's world feels unsteady. He slept on the couch at first. But when she walked over at 2 a.m., eyes wide and soft, he said nothing. She simply whispered, Can you stay closer? And he did. The storm wasn't over, but they weren't running from it anymore. They were facing it together. And for the first time in years, the quiet between them wasn't filled with unspoken words. It was filled with strength. Asterisk when the past comes knocking. The sun rose gently over Los Angeles, but inside Sandra Bullock's house, the light felt distant. After the anonymous threat, her smile had grown quieter, her walks shorter, her sleep thinner. But through it all, Keanu stayed. Not like a bodyguard, not like a savior. He stayed like a friend who finally stopped watching from the sidelines and stepped inside the storm. That morning, Sandra made coffee 2 mugs, without asking. Keanu leaned against the kitchen counter and sipped silently. Neither spoke until she finally said, I don't want this fear to rewrite our story. He nodded. It won't. But the truth was things had changed. They didn't talk about projects anymore. They canceled public events. Even the walks in the park became rare. Still, they didn't hide from each other, and in that, they found something even stronger. 3 days later, Keanu received an unexpected visitor at his door. It was a young woman, maybe 22, with eyes full of nervous energy. I'm sorry, she said. I shouldn't be here, but I didn't know what else to do. Keanu stepped outside. You don't know me, she said, but I know someone who's trying to hurt Sandra. His chest tightened. Who, my uncle? His name is Alan. The name hit Keanu like a wave. Alan Thomas, Sandra's former partner. The man from the interview. The man behind the threat. He's not well, she said, voice shaking. He's angry. He's broken. He thinks she destroyed his life. But he's planning something worse. Keanu's jaw clenched. How do you know? He showed me a folder. Photos, letters. One was addressed to her son. He said he'd leak it all unless you disappear. Keanu took a deep breath. Where is he now? Las Vegas. He's staying at a motel near Fremont Street. Keanu didn't hesitate. Thank you, he said. You did the right thing. Just don't hurt him. She whispered. He's sick, not evil. Keanu didn't tell Sandra, not yet. He didn't want fear to take more from her. Instead, he packed a bag and left a note on her pillow. Trust me, give me 1 day. He drove to Vegas without music, only the hum of the road and the weight of silence beside him. By the time he reached the motel, the sky had turned golden orange. He parked, walked past the flickering neon sign, and knocked on door number 12. A voice from inside barked. What? It's Keanu, he said calmly. A pause. Then the door opened. Alan Thomas stood in a wrinkled shirt, eyes sunken, hands trembling from too much whiskey or too many regrets. You've got nerve, Alan hissed. Coming here. I'm here to listen, Keanu said. Alan scoffed. Listen. Now you want to hear me? You said Sandra ruined your life. Tell me why. Alan stared. He hadn't expected that. Because she left, he spat. Because she moved on. Because she replaced me with a you. Keanu didn't react. She didn't replace you. You pushed her away. Alan slammed his fist on the table. I loved her. Then why are you trying to destroy her? Alan's voice cracked. Because I'm the one who stayed when no one else did. But she kept talking about you, even when we were together. Do you know what that feels like? Keanu lowered his eyes. Yes, because I spent years wondering if she ever thought of me. Alan's anger dropped for a second, just long enough for the pain to surface. I'm sick, he whispered. I don't sleep. I don't work. I just sit and think about all the ways I lost. Keanu reached into his jacket and pulled out a piece of paper. It was a letter, handwritten. This is for you, Keanu said. From both of us. Alan unfolded it slowly. The first line read, you may hate us, you may feel forgotten, but we still believe you can heal. His lips trembled. Then he began to cry. They talked for 2 hours. Not about fame or love triangles or revenge. They talked about pain, about getting lost, about forgiveness. And by the time Keanu left, Alan had promised something he hadn't said in years. I'll get help. Keanu nodded. And I'll be here if you do. He returned to Los Angeles just after midnight. Sandra was waiting on the porch in her robe, barefoot, her hair loose in the breeze. You scared me, she said softly. I'm sorry, he said, stepping closer. Where were you? Protecting what we've built. She studied him for a long moment, then asked, did it work? I think it did, Keanu said. But there's something else we need to do. The next day, they stood in front of a small group of young adults at a mental health awareness event. In Santa Monica, no cameras, no red carpet, just folding chairs and honest voices. Keanu spoke about grief. Sandra spoke about healing. And together, they said what most people in Hollywood are too afraid to say. The ones who hurt us don't always need punishment. Sometimes they need to be seen. That night, after the event, they walked home in silence. Hand in hand. Not because everything was fixed, but because they had chosen love. Not in spite of the broken pieces, but because of them. As they stood in her backyard under the stars, Sandra said quietly, I used to think love was about safety. And now, Keanu asked, now I think it's about bravery. He smiled. Then let's be brave. And they kissed under the moonlight, not like in the movies. Not with swelling music or perfect angles, but with the kind of quiet, steady love that says, I'm not going anywhere. Love finally spoke. Night sky was velvet black, with just a few stars blinking through the haze. But for Keanu and Sandra, it wasn't the stars above that mattered. It was the silence between them, finally free of regret, free of doubt, and most of all, free of fear. 2 months had passed since the night Keanu walked into that tribute and opened his heart to the world. A lot had changed. Some friends distanced themselves quietly. A few executives pushed back on upcoming projects, nervous about the headlines. Sponsors called with questions they had no right to ask. But none of it mattered, because for the first time in decades, Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock were living, not playing, not pretending, not performing, just living. And they were doing it together. On a calm Sunday morning, Keanu stood barefoot in his garden, a mug of tea in his hand. The wind carried soft hints of jasmine and rosemary from the flower beds. Sandra sat nearby on the wooden swing bench, her knees tucked under a blanket, watching him. "You always walk around barefoot now?" she asked playfully. "Helps me feel grounded." He smiled. "Try it." She shook her head. "I'm not ready to join the barefoot club." "You'll be," he grinned. They had made a quiet routine for themselves. Breakfast at home, walks with no cameras, books swapped with little notes scribbled in the margins, letters left on pillows, and sometimes silence, not the old silence that used to keep them apart, but a new silence, one that said, "I'm here, even when I'm quiet. I'm with you." Keanu had started writing again. Not scripts or poetry, just thoughts. One evening, he handed her a notebook. It was titled, "Things I Never Said." Inside were pages filled with memories, both painful and beautiful. A page read, "I wanted to hold your hand during that sunset scene, not because the script said so, but because my heart did." Another read, "I didn't call you after the premiere, because I was afraid your silence would be louder than your words." And then one that simply said, "Thank you for forgiving me." Before I ever asked, Sandra closed the notebook and pressed it to her chest. "How long were you carrying this?" she asked. "Long enough to know I never want to carry it alone again." They were happy. But life, as always, found one last twist. One morning, Sandra received a call from her agent. "There's a rumor," the voice said nervously, "that you and Keanu turned down the studio's offer. Is that true?" "Yes," she said calmly. "But this film is huge. People are expecting you to reunite on screen. It's being pitched as the greatest romantic comeback in cinema." Sandra didn't flinch. "We're done performing romance. We're living it now. This could cost you." "Then let it." And she hung up. Later that day, she found Keanu fixing the fence outside her home. "We just lost a big film," she said. He looked up. "You okay?" She shrugged. "Honestly, I don't care." He smiled. "Then we're exactly where we need to be." That evening, they drove down the Pacific Coast Highway. No destination, no schedule, just waves crashing beside them and the quiet beat of music from the radio. As they reached a quiet cove, they stopped and stepped out, barefoot in the sand. Sandra looked at him and asked, "Do you think we missed our chance all those years ago?" Keanu shook his head. "No, I think we were just writing the preface." She laughed. "And now we're in chapter 1? Maybe chapter 2, he teased. Chapter 1 was the night of the tribute. She looked at him for a long time. "So what do we write now?" He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small box. Her heart stopped. But when she opened it, there wasn't a ring. Instead, there was a folded paper. She opened it. It was a photo from the set of Speed. Young Keanu and young Sandra, side by side, smiling under the hot lights. And underneath it, he had written, "Whatever speed we're going, I'll ride beside you." Her eyes filled with tears. "I don't need a ring," she whispered. "Me neither," he said. "I just need your hand in mine." And on that beach, without anyone watching, without cameras or scripts, they kissed again, not as co-stars, not as legends, but as two souls who had finally spoken the words that were buried beneath decades of silence. Weeks later, a journalist wrote a thoughtful article about them. It ended with this line, "Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock didn't give us a film. They gave us something more rare, an unfinished story that finally found its voice in their home." Tucked in a drawer next to handwritten letters and shared books lay a page they now added to every journal entry together. On the top, it read, "What? We're grateful for today." And every time they filled it out, the first line always stayed the same, "Each other."